Dear friends, Ruslan Belov here again with you. Well, do you all remember, dear friends, the supposedly super successful offensive by the AFU in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions? Zelensky and Trapati claimed they had taken more than 700 square kilometers of territory, recaptured 26 villages, and so on. As it turned out yesterday, the Vostok East grouping of forces released one long video filmed on the 13th and 14th that shattered all of Zelensky's damp fantasies against harsh reality. So today this beautiful fairy tale fell apart, and in most of these settlements supposedly taken by the AFU, Russian troops raised Russian flags on camera. A powerful media offensive in Ukrainian Patushne powerful, a word Zelensky loves to repeat so much that the internet has started calling him Mr. Powerful. In general, the offensive ended roughly the same way his 40-day plan to force Russia into peace did. Today, Western media are already reporting that Zelensky is downcast, upset that he's been left without missiles for the Patriot systems, and for now there's no way out of this situation for him. Nobody is giving him missiles, only Poland has promised 5, which is actually laughable given the scale that's needed. So Zelensky's powerfulness has faded somewhat lately. Now let's take a detailed look at what actually happened and in which settlements Russian infantry raised flags. By the way, some of the AFU fighters who raised flags in various settlements here in Dnipropetrovsk region are no longer with us. So along the Yanchur River, footage shows Russian troops raising flags in the settlements of Privilya, Krasnoherske, and Slahoda. Here, essentially, there are no major frontline changes. In other words, where the map already showed red, that has now simply been confirmed. Further east, the biggest map changes are taking place. Russian troops raised flags in Oleksivka, Stepov, Berizov, Ternov, and several kilometers of fields beyond that settlement also have Russian infantry present. At the junction of the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions, there's a change regarding the settlement of Lisne, previously considered to be under AFU control, but now there are Russian infantry there as well. What's actually important here isn't just that Russian troops took this settlement, but that the Russian army has crossed to the other side of the Vovcha River and taken important wooded areas. At any moment now we could see footage from inside the settlement of Velika Mikhailivka itself, a fairly sizable settlement. This actually opens up an opportunity for the Russian side to first clear everything up to the Vovcha River, since Ukrainian forces now have to funnel troops into this pocket specifically across the river. For the Russian side, priority number 1 is to push this territory up to the river. After that, command can decide whether to push deeper into the Dnipropetrovsk region, though I wouldn't rule out that the priority goes to the Zaporizhzhia direction instead. But things here are not nearly as bad for the Russian army as AFU PR people are trying to portray. From the Zaporizhzhia region, updates have come in from the settlements of Voskersenka, Alexandrad, Pidubne, Mene, Zeleny High in the north, Zirka, Tovste, and Yolta. In short, a huge number of settlements supposedly taken by the AFU have actually returned to Russian control, since even if 2 AFU soldiers managed to sneak in and raise a flag, that says nothing about actual control over the settlement. This whole area is still a layered patchwork, and I think the Russian side will now reinforce its positions to finally clear and take full control of these places, since the situation in some of them may be 50-50. That's exactly what reliable pro-Russian open-source analysts, mappers are saying. From the Zaporizhzhia front, there are reports of a large number of glide bomb strikes on the western side of Orikhiv, on the settlement of Novopavlivka. Incidentally, this is exactly where Russian forces have advanced in recent days. The goal of Russian forces coming from the Shebaki direction is to break into Novopavlivka and, using FPV first-person view drones, cut the supply route into the city of Orikhiv itself. The AFU understands this perfectly well and is trying to counter it. Russian aviation is also striking strong points and settlements in the area of the Kinka River. Supply to Orikhiv runs through Odarivka along the main H08 highway. The AFU has shifted prepared units into this sector. and taking them out with aviation is frankly the cheapest option compared to fighting them later in open fields and so on. From the eastern Zaporizhzhia front, it was announced today that the settlement of Rybalska had been taken, another small settlement added to the tally of the Vostok grouping. What this could lead to, I discussed in this morning's briefing. Further south, Boykivka and Serivka still need to be taken in order to push out onto a wide bridgehead toward the T0408 highway in the western direction. There's still a lot of work ahead. A lot of these small settlements, a couple of streets and a few dozen houses each still need to be taken. Now let's turn our attention to the Pokrovsk front in the area of Novorossiysk, where Russian forces managed to advance slightly. Russian forces are also striking AFU strongpoints here with airdrop bombs. It has to be said this front has been essentially frozen for months now. The Russian side clearly has other priorities: the Sloviansk sector around Droskivka, the northern Kharkiv region, and the Sumy bridgehead around Kupiansk. In short, there's a huge number of directions requiring troop reinforcement, and it's simply not possible to advance on all of them simultaneously. Interesting news came in today, by the way. The Ukrainian army used Flamingo missiles to strike a plant in Samara that manufactures space rockets used to launch Russia's Razvet satellites. In other words, the Ukrainian side clearly understands the stakes of what awaits it if the Russian side manages to achieve what it wants. 3 missiles were shot down, and 2 managed to break through air defenses. Interestingly, before this, Ukraine had launched dozens of such missiles, and nearly all were intercepted. It's odd that this time 2 got through. How much real damage was done to missile production is not yet known, since the workshops there are simply enormous and produce dozens of rockets per year. That's the news from the front today. No new information is coming in yet from Donbas and other regions. That's usually the case on weekends. So what conclusions can we draw from all this? To put it mildly, the victory declared by the Ukrainian side turned out not to be nearly as powerful as claimed as it was portrayed, and Repati, the AFU's new commander-in-chief, decided to start his tenure with, let's be honest, outright bullshitting. Dozens of villages that the AFU supposedly recaptured during its counteroffensive starting in November turned out today to actually be in the hands of Russian troops. On top of that, it needs to be understood that overall this whole territory is one big gray zone. Both small AFU infantry groups and Russian troops can slip in here, so there's certainly no talk of any full-fledged control from the Ukrainian side in this area. Moreover, with all these counteroffensives, the AFU's primary aim was to stretch the Russian Vostok grouping thin, forcing Russians to pull reserves in to contain this breakthrough and to stop the Russian advance in the Zaporizhzhia region. But as we can see, nothing of the sort happened. Russian forces have already entered Kharkiv and are fighting for the city. So as you can see, there's nothing even close to a successful success for the AFU here, and it can be stated that the declared counteroffensive has in fact failed. On to other news. In recent days, the Ukrainian side has been actively spreading information that the Russian army is once again bringing units from North Korea into its ranks. Ukrainian intelligence reports that there are now 50,000 soldiers on Russian territory compared to the previously stated 30,000. One of the goals of such claims, which Zelensky doesn't even hide, is an attempt to scare Western countries into thinking a horde of North Koreans is about to attack the civilized world. So give us a couple more $1 billion and we'll protect you and everything will be under control. In other words, Zelensky actively inflates such topics because it's a great opportunity to squeeze new aid packages out of Western partners, and in this case not only Western partners but also Japan and South Korea. Besides money, Zelensky is also asking Asian countries for Patriot missiles, basically wringing everything he can out of this situation. Let me remind you that this isn't the first time this has happened on the Russian side. During the Kursk military campaign, during the battle for Sucha, North Korean units were also used, so it can be assumed that these units will be deployed again in the near future. According to Ukrainian sources, these units will be deployed along the border of the Bryansk, Belgorod, and Kursk regions. In other words, somewhere in that area within the zone of responsibility of the northern grouping of forces. Sever, these units will be stationed on Russian territory. There's a fairly high probability that these units won't be deployed on Ukrainian territory itself in order to avoid, so to speak, larger international political complications. Because it's one thing for Korean units to be present on Russian territory under some international agreements, and quite another for those units to actually be deployed inside Ukraine itself. Most likely, though, of course, no one really knows. The North Koreans will simply reinforce the Russian northern front with their own manpower, freeing up tens of thousands of additional Russian army soldiers who are currently guarding the border there, so those troops can be freed up and redirected to wherever they're needed, most likely, I think, to the Kramatorsk front. At the very least, it's clear that the task set is to take Donbas first. What happens with Ukraine after that isn't clear yet, but the task of taking Donbas is definitely on the table, and that's something all experts agree on, by the way, Western, Ukrainian, and Russian alike. On the other hand, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, stationing these 50,000 soldiers in this zone could allow the Russian army to pull an equal number of units off the northern directions and redeploy them to other sectors. Now let's move on to the northern direction, where some updates and minor adjustments have also come in. Today, according to pro-Russian sources within the northern grouping of forces Sever, Russian forces reportedly managed to significantly improve their positions in the area of Kosasha-Lopan, as well as near the settlement of Kudievka. Pro-Russian sources have published this video footage, and in it we can see Russian soldiers raising flags in various parts of the settlement of Kudievka. This footage was actually published yesterday evening, August 14th, and it was expected that today the northern grouping of forces and the Russian Ministry of Defense would confirm control over this small village. However, that didn't happen. In all likelihood, confirmation of control over these territories will come either tomorrow or the day after. We continue monitoring the situation at the front. Also worth noting, Yuri Butasov, editor-in-chief of Sensor.net and an AFU serviceman, is warning that Ukraine's defenses could collapse near Sloviansk. According to him, Russian forces are pushing into the Chupitok forest and onto several dominant heights on the eastern outskirts of the city. His concern is that if Ukrainian units pull back and Russian forces establish drone positions there, the tactical advantage shifts firmly to Russia's side, and from that point on the situation for both Sloviansk and Kramatorsk would start deteriorating much faster. He calls the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk line the most convenient natural defensive Rubicon Ukraine has, and warns that losing these two cities would effectively mean losing Donbas altogether, which, in his view, would then translate into heavier pressure from the US and Europe on Kiev to accept Russian terms for ending the war. But Yusov's proposed fix is to hand responsibility for defending Sloviansk and Kramatorsk directly to 3rd Corps Commander Beletsky, expanding his zone of responsibility and funneling reserves specifically into the Sloviansk direction. And one more thing worth flagging before we wrap up. Russian sources are reporting that strikes on Kiev's food supply infrastructure could be coming within the next 24 hours. According to Ukrainian monitoring resources themselves, the expectation is an attack combining jet-powered drones and missiles aimed at the capital region, specifically targeting large food and goods warehouses in Kiev and the surrounding oblast. The read from these sources is that Russian intelligence has been showing sustained interest in disrupting food industry logistics around the capital based on the strikes already carried out and further ones reportedly being planned, the apparent goal being to leave supermarket shelves in Kiev empty. This reportedly covers not just food, but hygiene products and other essentials too, according to Ukrainian commentators discussing the threat, who are already urging Kiev residents to stock up now rather than wait. That's where we'll leave it for today. We continue monitoring the situation at the front.